Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Derek Shulman. And we're going to be talking about this book, Giant Steps. Now, Derek is one of the founding members of the progressive rock band Gentle Giant, of which I'm a great fan, and many of you, my viewers and listeners, know I really like that band. But I also want to say that by reading this book, Derek, I've realised that you've been in amongst my record collection for my entire life.
Oops. Well, I've become the Forrest Gump of the music business, I guess.
I mean, it is amazing how many bands you're literally your influence or finding them, signing them, helping them, redeveloping them, relaunching them. But where I want to start, and I think this is the best place to start because this event influences your whole aspect of what you did in your career, is the very sad death of your father, age 16. And I know your dad was an amazing jazz musician and music was everything to him, and the influence that had on the rest of you and your brothers and your family. But the way this event also affected also your moral compass, the way you saw yourself as being a musician. You say in the book, you put it down as inoperable mental shrapnel, as a phrase that the event was so huge, which I imagine from reading it, it's such a traumatic way that you've described this 30-minute window of when your dad was making the fire and then 30 minutes later he was gone.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, it was a trauma which I was there literally when he took his last breath, as well as my brother Phil, and it affected me both, throughout my life. I mean, therapy, to be honest with you, made me realize that my health anxieties I had, that I still have, were about my father being well an hour, before, and literally dying an hour afterwards in my arms, and those kind of traumas. You don't realize how much at a certain point in your life affect you, in your daily life, and why your anxieties or your some of your issues that you have to deal with are affected by these kinds of things earlier in your life, and this is what I try to sort of convey. But at the same time, I have to say that having had that terrible situation happen, we were also left with a fantastic DNA, if you like, of having his incredible musicality come drift down into our blood, the Shulmans, if you like, and so there's a double-edged sword here.
But you all had such amazing discipline to what you wanted to do as well. I mean, I know you were listening to lots of Stax records and Chess records and lots of soul, and then of course we move on quite quickly to the Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, which is I guess for those of the people watching and reading about this later on where we are now, the music scene then was so different to anyone picking up a guitar now. There were in a way there were bands everywhere, but in a way there wasn't. I mean, people were looking around for people to sign or people to book. I mean, then you literally, where you were in Portsmouth, you could get found, seen and discovered probably more easy than you could now.
Of course, yeah. It was a thankfully very different, naive era. And there was no internet, there was no iPhones, etc. So yeah, when you wanted to put a band together, obviously, if you go back a couple of more years, before Simon Dupree, the Beatles came out and they changed everything. I mean, they changed the culture, they changed the youth culture, they changed the musical culture, they changed everything for UK, and I'm living in America, but it really drifted all the way over throughout the world. So when Love Me Do came on the radio, that changed everything for me. When I
Yeah.
heard, and I went, I was going to a grammar school. I think you know what a grammar school is. And I had a couple of friends who were really into music. The rest of the kids were, or the boys, it's all boys school,
Yeah.
were very much into their careers, and they were streamed at a grammar school. You were going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a teacher, or or professor, or whatever. And I had a couple of friends who were into music. I remember speaking to a couple. I just heard this song on the radio. It's called Love Me Do. Did you hear it? And a couple of kids said, yeah, wow, I don't know who it is. Anyway, they changed everything. So getting back to your point about picking up a guitar and putting a band together in those days, yeah, it was very different. My first band were school friends. And, my first drummer had pots and pans for drums,
Yeah.
but he couldn't play even the pots and pans, unfortunately. So anyway, so that was it was a great time. It was a fantastically naive time. Um,
It was a fantastic naive time. However, it was that classic thing. You're so sure about what you wanted to be. When you were asked at school what you're going to be when you left school, you said, "I'm going to be a famous musician. I'm going to be on top of the pops." And obviously, you had your teacher saying, "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Derek, at all. It's not going to work." I mean, but did that kind of thing, which you hear a lot in some ways, but did that really spur you on to think, right?
yeah,
I'm going to show him, because later on, of course, you do pop back when you have a hit single with Kites to
yeah, but,
actually to say, look what I've done.
I wasn't gloating. I promise you. It
Well,
was
but
just
I can understand why you would do that, because it was being a musician, obviously what you've been through with your dad, and obviously doing your best for your mom, and you and your brothers trying to do the best you could here. Kites became a hit, and obviously you're already getting a lot of traction already before that. But yeah, what was that like? I mean, when your first real kind of hit single and the Top of the Pops event itself, because you're still very young, weren't you?
yeah. I think I was 17 or 18. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. What was like? It was incredibly special. I can't tell you. There are certain moments in your life
Yeah.
that are indelible. And I remember that we were coming back from we recorded the single Kites, if you like, and we literally were off doing a tour of Sweden, and we got a call on the boat coming back from Malmo to Hull, which is a god awful journey in those days. It's 36 hours on a ferry in the North Sea. We got this telephone, like the satellite telephone call, and I got the call from England saying, "Is there a Derek Shulman on board?" My first thought was, "Oh no, what's what?
Happened.
What? That's your first thought."
Yeah.
And I picked and the captain. I found the captain, and it was the publicist from our record company, and she said, "Guess what?" And I said, "What?" I mean, what are you going to tell me? You've got a hit. It's in the top 20, and it moved up to top 10 and top 5. I said, and I just remember that moment that it wasn't like we finally made it, but yes, we cracked the top 20, and we were going to be on top of the pops the next
Wow.
week. And that was, that for an English band in those days, it was everything.
Yeah, it
That
was.
was that was a moment in time which is certainly frozen in my mind anyway.
Yeah, it's amazing. The other thing that I really this is one of the best rock biographies I've ever read. I'm being totally serious, because normally you get, oh, and then we bought our third guitar, and then the manager did something. This could be easily be a film, Derek, to be honest, and it's literally a real page turner. It's highly recommended to anyone watching this or listening, and because there's so many, because of where you are in the music business. The next thing I'd put in my notes was that Elton John helps you out on a few gigs, who's struggling for money and can't believe that what you're about to pay him for doing these gigs is like really good to it. But I mean, what? Because this is before he was Elton John.
Oh
But
yeah, he's rich.
but I mean that's an amazing part of the story, and also the fact that when you wanted to move away from the pop, of Simon Dupree, that Elton was listening to Soft Machine and saying, well, maybe you should listen to some Spirit, to the next steps of where you want to go. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but when Gentle Giant starts to come together with Jerry Bron, putting the money behind it to give you time to explore, you're previously with Kites, it's pop music, it's got gorgeous harmonies. You're suddenly, as a singer, going to have to try and weave your vocal talents in amongst music that is
Right.
a bit more complicated.
to say to say the least. Yeah, well, Elton, yeah, he was well, he as you said, he depped for our regular keyboardist in a tour of UK, and me and my brother Ray got to know him, and he was just a fantastic guy, number one, and also a real muso, and he was a real collector and knew music from everywhere, and he also a great musician, and he recognized that we were doing, playing the circuit, the pop
Yeah.
circuit, which we were all doing, but he recognized that we were also able to keep up with him, and we were also pretty good musicians ourselves. And he said, you should really listen to some things that are happening, in other places. Band Spirit. I mean, if you heard of Frank Zappa, and we had, and we loved it. And Yeah, he sort of basically sort of steered the group towards listening to other things, and then of course, um, we having had that success and a couple of other hits, but we were well known in Europe and England as Simon Dupree, as a sort of R&B slash pop
Yeah.
soul group, and we were earning pretty good money. And the fact that we were able to offer Reg, as he was then, three times what he was earning, was a real surprise to him. Anyway, whenever he left, and we had decided finally to do something brand new, because really playing the circuit became very depressing. We certainly were making good enough money to, again, buy my mum a house, and with a bathroom.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
etc. Then we were looking for players that wanted to do something different. We didn't have any vision, honestly. We just knew that what we were doing as Simon Dupree was not something we wanted to do anymore. This is myself and my brothers. And We were looking for musicians to get together for a new vision of whatever came out of who we were. It's hard to describe, actually, because again, we didn't have a vision for what Gentle Giant became. It was just that we needed to be around musicians that had different ideas, and it was almost like opening a blank page. Anyway, we came up to Watford, where Reg was living with his mom, or near Watford, and he was with Bernie, and he wanted to basically audition to be in the band, and
Yeah.
he played songs like Skyline Pigeon and a couple of other songs, and me and Ray, we knew that he was a great musician, but it wasn't what we were looking for. What a pop kind of R&B thing was not what we wanted to be. We'd done that, and then he told us he's changed his name to Elton John, and we kind of
Yeah.
poo-pooed it. We thought, well, we did not to him, but on the way back. And of course, a year later, he became Elton John. And we had become Gentle Giant, and he was playing already as stadiums, and we were looking for gigs. But yeah, he was very intrinsic in this kind of where should we go, what should we do? But thankfully, we found our first. This is my brothers and myself, our first new member that changed what and who we were going to be. And I mean, we were talking before we got on air here, was a keyboardist who had a degree in composition and a degree in percussion, and was penniless, called Kerry Meniere. And Kerry joined the Shulman brothers as the first incarnation and
Yeah.
first member of the new group, which were going to be called Gentle Giant.
And that must, I mean, because Kerry and Ray are both obviously, read music and, write music. That must have, it was almost like a secret weapon for you, wasn't it? Because they were able to create music that, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that now any progressive rock band can look back through decades of time and drop in at various bands that made it and created this genre of music. But from where you are at this point, when you look behind you, there isn't anyone doing anything like it behind you at all. There's a few people popping up alongside you, the King Crimsons and Yes and all the rest of it. But even what you create, what Kerry and Ray start to create, these wonderful pieces of music, they are completely, now looking through the lens of time, different to anything else in that musical landscape of the time.
Yeah, well, it was, again, we didn't know what we were going to be, but we did know that we wanted to have musicians to push each other to do things that no, I wouldn't say no one else was doing, because it was we had influences, of course. In fact, every member had their influence, and that was the key to Gentle Giant. Kerry, as we just talked about, was he was classically trained at the Royal Academy of Music. Ray, my brother, was classically trained on the violin. I can read music. I was trained, on saxophone. I could read, but I love soul and R&B and Phil, my older brother, who was in the band for the first 4 albums.
Yeah.
He was a real jazzer. He loved bebop and Shorty Rogers, Charlie Parker, and Gary Green, our next member, was an incredible player, is an incredible player, and a real blues player. So all of these kind of inspirations, all of these where your inspirations come from, were put in this pot, and we just, I've said this before a lot of times, it was stirred up and put in a funnel and out dripped Gentle Giant. It really was that. And again, we didn't have any sort of vision of what it was going to be. It just was.
Well, as it says in the forward in the book, Tony Visconti loved that first album. One of the albums I think he's most proud of being involved with. On album number 2, Acquiring the Taste, Jerry Bron, who was putting everything, pushing, supporting you, he hated that one, didn't he?
Yeah, he hoped that the first album was a precursor to something which we'd get into a more sort of commercial, progressive thing. He was managing a band called Uriah Heep at that time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And he thought that we'd kind of like move into that direction. Well, we moved away from that direction to something which he just didn't understand, and said, "This is not really what I understand." And having been our sponsor and a patron in some respects, said, "I can't work with this." So we lost our manager and found another straight after that. But it was, but Tony was very, very important as well. Tony Visconti in the studio, because he was, again, classically trained and knew and had a feeling about what we were doing was going to be something special. In fact, I'm doing a couple of events with Tony at the beginning of the month, or the end of the month, just hanging out in New York, which is going to be pretty special.
Do you think, because Tony Visconti, I think, respected you all as musicians because, as you say, you could read and write music, because on the second album, he actually helped let you sit with him along the mixing desk, didn't he, and actually learn more about producing, so that on the third album, you actually took control yourself in producing that, didn't you, on Three Friends?
Yeah, we did. And in fact, he was a mentor and really was a friend and a mentor. And I can't thank him enough for being there at the very beginning. But Ray especially, but we all would. look over his shoulder and say, "What's he doing? What is that? How does that stuff work?" We were very much inquisitive little brats actually, but nevertheless, and he allowed us to do that, which is fantastic. So
Yeah.
yes, three friends, we produce ourselves.
And I think another part in the book that sounds really surreal, and it's a bit like Spinal Tap, but years earlier, is when you supported Jimi Hendrix, but you didn't technically support Jimi Hendrix because he died. You supported a film of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, that was one of our first tours. And, and yeah, we'd support. We put our gear up and then play to an audience that came to see the film. And some days 10 people showed up. Some days 150 or 300 people would show up. But it was an experience that you have to go through as a young up and coming band to do anything and everything to gain a following. And that's something we did. We when we went on stage, we we really enjoyed entertaining as well as like playing our music, and I think that's something that hopefully I explained in the book that Gentle Giant was a band that didn't just go out there and play the records. We played something which was different to the records, but we also pushed each other to do something very different and entertained the audience with smiles on our faces, so that the audience would go away with smiles on their faces, as opposed to thinking they'd been at the LSO show, concert, and clapped at the very end.
I think that is one of the special things about Gentle Giant, is that it's very complex music that, it's very I'd say it's music that each time it passes over you, you hear something that you never heard before. But what the other thing you just mentioned there is that when you played live, you played different arrangements of this music. So live, which is why they're playing the full live album, those interpretations are so different. It's not just like in some rock bands when they did a live album, the guitar solo was a bit longer than the studio version. Yours were vastly different. And I know that around the time Octopus is one of my favorite albums by the band. Of course, Phil, who was a lot older than you and Ray, he got a family. It was all becoming too much with being on tour and everything, so he moves away then. That was obviously a very tricky time for you all, because you're in a different headspace, all of you, where the band's going. All four engines are running, you're taking off, and Phil just says, I can't do this anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was a very tough time for him and for the band, of course, because he was in, he was out, he was in, he was out, and that was a very unsettling time, especially for me and Ray, because it was our sibling, it was our brother,
Yeah.
and even though that we having brothers in a band generally is a tough thing to have, the rivalry and all the other things that you'd remember as babies, as kids. They would come to the surface even more as musicians. However, so he left the band during at the end of an Italian tour, and we were left as a five-piece, and we weren't sure quite what to do. But we decided that, okay, we'd come so far, and we had, as you said, Octopus was kind of almost a milestone. It was a really good album. I think that album was a very good one too, one of our best, especially with Phil. But we got there, and we sort of taken that step to kind of almost where we were going to go, and then we had to rethink, and we did. And we went into the studio and made In a Glass House, which at that time was a very tough record to make, because here we are, we have to rethink of who we are as a five-piece. I have to take over all of the I did a lot of the lyrics, I did some of the music, of course, but all of the lyrics, and I had to be the front guy and take all the responsibility, and we all had to do things as a 5-piece that we did as a 6-piece. And we went in and made that album in a very short period of time. And it was a hard record to make because it was emotionally a very sort of, how can I put this? A ragged time for all of us,
Yeah.
especially the drums. However, I'm just going to say this. I'm in the middle of, I should say it because it's the end of the book. I'm in the middle of remixing that album. And when it was done, when the album was released in a glass house originally, it was quite well received in Europe, and it wasn't very well received over in America. But I'm listening to it, and I think it's a really great record. I'm listening to it for literally almost for the first time, and I'm hearing things that I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I don't know how we did it. The things that I'm listening to and hearing are pretty damn great.
Because we'll just because I know that's towards the end of the book, but I think as we're on that, because I also love that album, and I know that it was one of those albums where you didn't have the multi-tracks to be able to remix it. When Stephen Wilson has worked a lot with on the back catalogue, but now of course with AI technology, you are able to do things that you could never have thought of before. Is that what has given you the insight into thinking, wow, I don't know how we actually we constructed this album at the time?
Yeah, it did, and I'm listening to it. And in fact, I'm working on this in the studio here in Brooklyn, and it's got the highest end of AI, where you can actually separate the tracks, not just the step.
Yeah.
And it's superb what you can do. And I'm listening to it. Literally, it feels like the first time for me. And I'm listening to what we did and how we were able to do it. And I'm pretty amazed, actually, of how we did this. We were. It's such a clever and an interesting album. So I'm giving my viewpoint because I'm in the middle of that right now.
No, that's brilliant to hear. One of the things that happens around going back in the time when this is all happening is that, which has an impact probably on where your career goes in a few years' time, is obviously WWA and the contracts with Sabbath and Don Arden and your involvement in that. Was that event? I mean, I know a lot of people know about this probably already, but did that have a real impact on you thinking, one day I'm going to have more involvement with the music business from that side of the desk than when I am now?
Yeah, well, yes, to a degree, yes. I was always Phil and myself were always the ones that would pick up the phone to speak to our managers or collect the fees and whatever was needed to keep the band going. To put it into our accounts and get our salaries, etc. And then I was the only one, and I'd pick up the ball a little more. And I had decided, I was the front guy. I was I was a front man, and also, the guy that I think took that part of the band more seriously than anyone else. Of course, I was involved in the creative process. Of course, I was involved in the stage and everything else. But I also took that more seriously than anyone else, and I think that set me up, if you like, to a certain degree, to join the dark side and become Darth Vader after Gentle Giant called it a day.
Yeah, because after you signed to Chrysalis, Power and the Glory is a really much happier album than In a Glass House. Freehand, I mean, you describe it as being at the top of your game, and I would agree. Interview, as you say in the book, maybe you should have had a bit of a break around that time, but you meet your wife, who you love of your life, and then Playing the Fall comes out, which captures the band in perfect position of everything you could do live. And then punk happens in the UK, which means that the band is now thinking, should we be like Genesis and do Follow You, Follow Me? Or yes seem to be having more commercial success. We could have a bit of that. And that's where it starts to kind of, you try and change like these other progressive rock bands have, but your fan base seems to accept change far less
Yeah,
than theirs.
yeah, absolutely correct. And also, we weren't very good at it. We weren't. We were never going to be a pop band, and so it was. In some respects, I'm really, and that yes, we I think we probably did try to emulate the artists that you're talking about, and have a hit song rather than an album or do music that we liked. And it was a failure. But you learn from mistakes. And we went on to do our last album, Civilian, in LA, which we thought, okay, if this works, we pared down the sound, but we're still Gentle Giant. And I think that was a really good album actually, but it
Yes,
wasn't the Gentle Giant of the mid 70s. But again, we didn't want to emulate. We're as musicians and people, you progress anyway, and so to do the same thing over and over, that wouldn't be any of us. I mean, Carrie, Ray, John, etc. And Gaz, we were progressing personally and musically. So that was an album that came out, and we thought if this works, perhaps we'll have a new beginning. It didn't work, thankfully. I'm saying that because one thing that I personally would have hated would be become our own tribute band, and that being a parody of what we were. So our legacy, if you like, is still. I'm looking at your records behind you. So those albums that are still there are something that left in some respects untouched and untarnished, if you like. So anyway, that was I had to think about what I wanted to do after we called it a day.
And you stopped. I mean, that was it. You stopped. That you never reformed. You and Ray just stopped playing together. It just stopped. And I think that this part in the book is really interesting because I've spoke to obviously a lot of musicians, and in a way the pilot light never goes off. It's always there in the background. But there's a part in the book when you start your first job working for Polygram after the other side of the desk, and you meet Kiss, and Gene Simmons sees you wearing a suit and goes, I know you. I mean, when that happened, were you thinking wearing a suit, maybe I should still be on the stage being a lead vocalist? You had literally walked away from being a performer at that point.
Yes, I did. Yeah, and I knew that this was something that I'd had my run, and to try to do that again would have taken a lot of effort, mental and physical. But yeah, it was, and for a while, to be perfectly honest, I kind of like put Gentle Giant into the background because that was history, and
Yeah.
people would say that. I mean, as you said, Gene Simmons said, "You're Derek Shulman, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, he said, "Well, you played with us
Yeah.
in Long Island," and being reminded of that was kind of uncomfortable in certain respects because I was trying to reinvent myself in a different fashion, and to a degree I did, but nevertheless, it was always there, and having had the experience and the musicality and being a musician and being able to present myself on stage did me very well on the other side of the fence. So when Gene said, "Aren't you the," and when I asked him who was the co-writer for "Lick It Up" with, who wrote the songs, and he said it was Desmond Child, and I introduced Desmond to John Bon Jovi. All of these things started. It was like weird because all of my back history came into the foreground, if you like, in certain respects.
The other thing I find really interesting is because you, the Shulman brothers, and Kerry, all of you are incredible musicians, and you're very observant about whether other bands could play as well as you, or you know, and obviously I know how you felt when you saw the Clash in the studio, and thinking what were they were like as musicians. And you also say in the book that you were never really into heavy metal, which is this is an interesting thing, because all rap. But I think maybe your talent, where you went next with your career, is that you were able to just see through genres and see the potential in somebody. Because obviously some of the bands you were with Roadrunner Records were really hardcore metal. Pantera were really extreme heavy metal. But you could see beyond the genre to what could be made possible.
Well, Pantera, let me just, you mentioned Pantera in particular. I was running ATCO at the time. I was a president. And, let me just say this, that I went down to, after, a club in Texas, and I was, running a company. It was a fairly big company. And within 3 songs, I became a fan, not just a fan. I mean, I just knew they had it. There's a word, and there's very few bands that in your gut, and in your heart, and in your head, all together, they have it. They are going to be important. And I knew that it locked me in, and within 3 songs, I knew this band, even though they were extreme, but also amazing musicians. Let me just say, Pantera is certainly a different kind of band than Gentle Giant were, but at the same time, Vinny and Dimebag and Phil and Rex, they were great musicians. I mean, they could play their asses off in the genre they were playing, and I became a fan. I mean, within 3 songs, and I signed them, of course, and I knew they wouldn't get on MTV, and I knew they would not get on radio, but I certainly knew that if they convinced me, as this jaded old fart executive, if you like, to be as a fan, I knew that they would go out there and convince an audience, and so I put the money behind their live shows. And in fact, when they played a place like whatever it is, a club, 500 people. The next time around, they'd have 5,000 people. That word of mouth went out there. And I just knew that.
I mean, I just want to roll back just a little bit to where before you became to ATCO, and you're in the music business. And to many of us in the normal world, when we went to find another job or we got headhunted, we'd be enticed with a company car or private health or maybe a yearly bonus. But where you are, it's bowls of cocaine, women of ill repute, whatever you want, and it's just a different world. But again, this goes back to my opening question about your dad and everything, because you're living in a world where you don't drink, really don't do drugs, and you're completely focused on the music, supporting the musicians, and making a difference. Did the way that you were in this world and how you conducted yourself, did it kind of give you a faster route to the top because everyone else was distracted and not really on the ball? Probably haven't worded that very well.
No, actually, it's interesting you saying that, because certainly, of course, when I was, I was at Polygram, I was, had some good successes there. Thankfully, I was very lucky that I was able to, do well at that company. And it bemused me, actually, to tell you the truth, that how these executives would try to lure me to become a part of their company by offering what they thought would be things that would be attractive to me. And listen, I'm not saying that women of ill repute are not attractive, but I was married, and and that meant a great deal to me. And drugs and alcohol was something that I saw, not drugs, but something I saw destroy I guess in some respect, my father. He was a drinker and a smoker, and that's something that again, getting through, all the way through the book, I never had done. All of these offerings were absolutely meant nothing to me, even though they were offered, and I had to gently turn these things away. And and did I appear uncool? Possibly, but I didn't care. I didn't want the blow and the hookers, if you like. That was not what I was interested in. I was interested in helping these artists become as big as they could be, using my experience in whatever situation they were in.
And also, I think the other thing that's really commendable, I think, in the way you approach this second part of your career is that because you'd been in Gentle Giant and obviously you'd had great success, but equally towards the end of your career, it was tough, and you'd played to some venues where you hadn't had so many people in because the fashions of music was changing. That when you meet Bon Jovi and you ask him, what do you want to be? And he says, I want to be bigger than Elvis. That you didn't kind of say, oh, look, kid, I've been there, I've done that. You've got to pay your dues. You saw the potential in him without thinking, no, you'll have to put at least 7 years in before you see. You just saw what could happen. And also, you were very lucky he listened as well. He was very open to you saying, I think you need Desmond Child to help you on this one.
Yeah. No, well, when he said that to me, it was just one-on-one. He was 70 or 18. I was probably 10 years old or whatever. But he said I wasn't being punked. I just knew that this was exactly what he said. What he said was exactly what he wanted. And it came from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. And it kind of reminded me, now I'm thinking about it, of me sitting in Portsmouth Southern Grammar School in 4B saying, I want to be a rock star. And all the other kids saying, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to be a politician. It's kind of like that was exactly what it was. And he was determined. And when you see that kind of drive and determination, you can't stop it. All you can do is nurture it and help it along.
Yeah. Amazing. And then, of course, you swapped Pete Townsend for AC/DC, and I think it was Stevie Nicks for Bad Company, was it? And I mean, you relaunched them with Holy Water, Dream Theater, and you were involved in the Monsters of Rock Festival in Moscow as well. And then I want to touch on this before we finish, because you also moved over to Roadrunner and Slipknot and etc. But rap music. Because of all the genres that might in some way have sampled Gentle Giant, and I think there's rap over here with soul and funk, and we slowly move over. I would think that Gentle Giant is the furthest point away from rap. How did those two worlds of Gentle Giant and rap music overlap? Because it's happened a lot, hasn't it?
A lot, and it's very interesting in that I now believe that hip hop music in America, the underground more than the mainstream, is probably the most progressive kind of music out there. They move sounds around that you would never expect, and so time signatures around that you would never expect, and that's kind of what Gentle Giant did. And in fact, Questlove, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's very, very famous in America. He's on the TV every night. He came to me and said, I don't know whether you know this, and I'm going to say something, but I hope it's not derogatory. He said, you guys, Gentle Giant, have a ghetto pass. Meaning that in the hip hop world, we're revered.
Wow.
Yeah. And in fact, Travis Scott, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
Had a gigantic hit this year last year and this year with opening a show with Proclamation. And, it's just amazing to see all these kids singing along with Gentle Giant who are listening to hip hop, and kind of like in pleasant disbelief that world has integrated our music into their world.
because it is amazing, Derek, because when you said you'd left, when you spoke to Gene Simmons and you thought, I've left Gentle Giant behind, that was then. I don't do that anymore. And because of the internet and forums and all that, Gentle Giant's kind of brand has just grown and grown, and it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger. All the box sets from Madfish, and of course now the the sampling from rap artists. It's, I mean, going back to part in the book when you said you supported or you were with Yes and they were arrogant and not very friendly, it's amazing that here we are now in 2025. Gentle Giant have been sampled. Um, in a way, you're more fashionable than you've ever been. Uh, it's just amazing how Gentle Giant's image is now bigger than ever before in some ways.
Well, yeah, you're right. I think that that says a lot for who we were, and Kerry and Ray and the bands. We were, we never, I don't use the word sold out, but we were always, I'm going to use this terrible word, authentic. That's what
Real
we were.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah, we were. We didn't want to be like anyone else. We weren't like anyone else. And so what we did was very gentle giant. We lived in Portsmouth. We didn't live in London. We didn't hang out with the cool bands. We just hung out with ourselves. We actually we were a real band. That hung out in Portsmouth and rehearsed in Portsmouth and went on tour together. Until the very end when families and you start becoming parents, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was amazing. And the little thing and I will say this about the guys in the band is something that I've realized is that we dedicated ourselves in Gentle Giant, and we personally dedicated ourselves to our spouses. If you speak to Kerry, you speak to Gaz, you speak to John, we're still with our wives that we vowed our lives to. And Phil's been married 60 plus years. Gaz has been married 50 plus. We're all been with the same spouses and not had these multiple wives and affairs and God knows what else. So I think Gentle Giant is a band that dedicated themselves to the music and was never knocked off base by other things.
I think you're absolutely right, Jake, and that's why I wanted to start with the sad part of your dad dying, because I think it affected the way you all looked at music and what you wanted to do with your lives, and in some way the way that your kind of moral compass. When Kerry joined you, he couldn't have joined a better set of musicians, could he? Because of the way he was, and his kind of spiritual outlook on life. It was a perfect place for him to be in Gentle Giant in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, absolutely. And we were, spiritually, morally, and everywhere else, we were together. We were a band.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, Giant Steps. This is a wonderful book. And also the part, where you do meet your wife is such a lovely, beautiful story as well, Derek. It just would make a great film, seriously. But thank you so much for all of your time today, Derek. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you. And I can't wait for when In the Glass House comes out in the new version, the remix. That will be absolutely amazing to listen to. But thank you so much for your time. Take care, and hopefully I'll talk to you again in the future.
Thanks very much, man. Good to see you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Thank you. A huge thank you to my guest, Derek Shulman. This book, Giant Steps, is absolutely brilliant. And I said in part during the interview, saying, you get a lot of rock biographies saying, and then we were able to buy a real guitar, and we had the difficult third album, the manager left with the money. This literally could be a film. Derek's life, going through being a pop star to a prog star to being a record company executive, signing some of the biggest names, you know, AC/DC, Dream Theater, Bon Jovi, and these classic albums, Octopus, Three Friends, and all the adventures in between. Elton John. I've touched on so many things. I could have talked to Derek, and if he watches this, but I could have talked to Derek for hours. I had enough questions, I reckon, to go on for probably for about 5 or 6 hours, literally. As I went through this book and I made so many notes and what could be good questions. And as I've finished the interview now, I've looked down and realized so many things I didn't talk about. But I'm so grateful to be able to talk to Derek. I mean, I've spoken to Kerry Monier from Gentle Giant as well, and that was wonderful. But Derek, because of his getting the other side of the desk in the record companies and his approach and his love of the musicians, it really comes across that he really cared to get the best out of the talent of the musicians and make it was about the music. And one of the things in this book, it talks about how many people in the music business just saw everything as product, everything as sales figures. And Derek was not that person. And also him as a human being, um, love of his dad and his brothers and their mom and their friends and how they've looked after each other and how they met their partners and their children and the whole way he's done this. And you know that my thing is all about music is the healer and the doctor. And I just, I think that is one of I think my favorite interviews. I'm so pleased to have spoken to Derek Shulman. This book, Giant Steps, is highly recommended. And In the Glass House is coming out soon, which, as Derek said, was a hard album to make with Phil, his older brother, leaving the band. But now, of course, time, perspective, hindsight, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you, Derek. Thank you for all of your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I can tell I'm thrilled. I'm going to have to listen to some Gentle Giant, probably from the box set that's behind me. Or I might even listen to the first Bon Jovi album again, or a bit of Dream Theater. Who knows? Or maybe some AC/DC, or Holy Water by Bad Company. Oh, there's so much. Or maybe some Type O Negative, or Slipknot. Oh, who knows? Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, to our podcast, to the website at nowspinning.co.uk, and also wherever you're on social media. So are we. And if you become a patron or YouTube member, you can join our private communities on Facebook and on WhatsApp. And we have a pub meetup via Zoom twice a month called the Now Spinning Arms, and you can come along to that as well. And of course, you can also buy some merch. But we've got lots of videos coming up, lots of podcasts coming up, lots of artists coming on board to be interviewed. So thank you again. And as I said, Giant Steps, Derek Shulman's autobiography. It's absolutely brilliant, and it is out now. Take care, all of you. And as I've said, music is the healer and the doctor. Keep spinning those discs, and I'll talk to you all very, very soon.